Do you guys remember back to the spring when we flew over to stunning Österreich to drive that ridiculously powerful Porsche Cayenne Coupe, the one with the turbo engine? Kumo and I were doing some number crunching, and that was 23 episodes ago, not including inside the MotoMan Studio episodes. And what's more amazing, of those 23 episodes, 13 were SUVs. Now, further amazing, that would have been more had it not been for Kumo and I choosing to drive ridiculous cars when we're shooting at MotoMan Studio A. So today, we're gonna do something incredibly wild and rare and drive a car. An ordinary, run-of-the-mill, four-door sedan car. Got a hill, climbing up the Beeline Highway here, pushing much harder than I really should in a D-segment sedan. And this delivers power differently than previous Sonatas have before. The way in which it delivers power is different. So under a load like this, going uphill at some elevation, sad to say, that's a unique trick nowadays, but one that is wholly welcome. You want to see a party trick? Come with me. Okay, you ready? Kommen Sie hier. I think it's doing it. I think it's doing it. I think it's doing it. It's doing it. It's doing it. Okay, so this is really meant for parking lots, not off-road. I decided to reinterpret it for this application. You know how we get new features on cars? I like to segment them between features that you actually use and features like this, which are great party tricks for your friends. When you're like at a barbecue, you take them out to the parking lot and show them this, and you do it backwards and forwards, and then backwards again, backwards again. And that's pretty much all you do with it. You don't actually use it, you just impress your friends. Still cool, nonetheless. Oh, it can even sense that I'm standing near the car. Look at that, it's turning around me to avoid me. That is entirely cool. And it turned off because there was an obstacle, me. Oh, and by the way, the last time we did this trick was with an $80,000 BMW. Yes, indeed, this is a practical car, but steering is an important part of the discussion because if we're honest, most cars in this segment, even previous Sonatas, had the dreaded vague on center field steering, but the minute you get into this thing, you notice a significant difference. You can feel Albert Biermann's fingerprints all over it. Like, let's go a little bit faster into this turn here. Please do not try this at home. And what you get, dare I say, is some weight to the steering. Previous Sonatas was kind of spongy, if I'm honest. Here, there's actual feedback. We've talked about this. I've said they're always kind of on the bottom end of the driving dynamic spectrum because they were designed more for value than they were driving dynamics or even ride comfort. There was more money put into the stuff. Here, clearly someone has put an investment into the way the car drives. Even not a car person would get behind the wheel of this thing and say, wow, there's something that really stands out about this. I don't know what it is, I can't put my finger on it, but it just works. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news, the interior here was done in the studio of our old friend Chris Chapman. Now, fully understand, I am completely biased, but here they have knocked it out of the park. This is orders of magnitude better than pretty much anything the Hyundai Kia group has done. I would argue it's on par, probably better than Genesis, and it's not so much just the design, it's more the color and trim here. And there's no nice way to put this. I had to think on this for a bit, but this is what Cadillac interiors should look like today. It's that different. Now, that's where we end with the good news. The bad news is, no matter how much I try, I just don't like those push-button transmissions. And I would challenge you to use that in a three-point parking situation, in tight cities. It is just a complete pain in the ass. I get the packaging, but I just don't like the functionality of it. And then there's that screen. Looks great, which I'm there. However, when one does the fancy version, which this is, there is a bigger screen. Okay, going with that. But I have told you over the years that Hyundai, Kia, they're one of the better ones at UX because they still use knobs and toggle switches. And in this case, it's to an art form, these toggle switches. But here, there is a knob for volume. However, in the bigger screen, there is no knob for tuning. The car without the big screen does have a tuning knob. Here, you have to make do with seek and track, and this does not work when one is driving. So, as much as I love you, Chris, how about you put a knob back there? If you could do that, I'd be greatly appreciative. And now for something completely different, a real-world scenario. Have some slow-moving traffic here on the Beeline Highway, a horse trailer with some service trucks. I want to pass them, so I'm gonna signal to pass, and then hit the gas a bit. Notice the quick downshift. This is really not anything to do with the engine, it's more to do with the transmission, in that there is a real transmission. So many OEMs have gone with CVTs nowadays. This is a scenario where CVTs, they might deliver better fuel economy and have less moving parts, but they don't work in a very real-world scenario like this. Here, by sticking with actual gears, I'm able to make a pass and do it, I would argue, not only faster, but more safe. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game in mind, the options game, with today's contestant. You know what, before we get to the contestant, let's talk about the stunning location. Behind me is Camelback Mountain in the Phoenix Valley of the Sun. We are in one of the most magical little hamlets of the Phoenix Valley of the Sun, Paradise Valley. In back of you is Mummy Mountain. Let's just say it's very good to be back. Fork 'em Devils. Anyway, back to today's contestant, the 2020 Hyundai Sonata Limited, for a base price of $33,300. That we had only one factory option. Believe it or not, that would be floor mats. Optional in a $33,000 car for $135. To that, we add a destination fee of $930 for a total suggested retail price of $34,365. Now, if you saw our Palisade episode, you know I'm somewhat sandbagging you here because this is the most loaded car that has everything in it and the kitchen sink. The most basic Hyundai Sonata for 2020 is $23,400. Quite a bargain when you think about it. The sort of one that you really want with the keyless entry is about 25 grand, but the one most people will buy, the one that has a sunroof and a couple of things you really kind of need in a car like this, would be $29,250. Now, back to Paradise Valley. Okay, so my attempt at being practical, clearly there is plenty of room back here for a 6-footer. That's where I would sit. And then armrest, there really is no path through there from what I could see, but there is some practicality in that my road wife would be very excited to see that there is a USB port, but it's not a C-type, so I'll put that there, plug in my phone. And then oddly, there is only one map pocket, not one back there. Considering this is a rather expensive car, at least for a cheapskate like me, I would expect two. Let's take a break from the car specifically and turn to some usable technology. Any of you that are heavy-duty road warriors are familiar with the concept of a digital key. I know I've used it at Marriott hotel properties where you use your phone to check in and that becomes your hotel room key. Or if you've flown over the past 5-8 years, every airline has an app. You check in on the app, and then your phone becomes your boarding pass. Well, Hyundai has taken a page out of that book, and there's a couple of upsides and there's one major downside. The upside is you can use either an NFC card or your phone as the key for the car. Another upside is you can provision keys at will. So you can have one for you and one for your wife on different phones. Or you can provision a key, say, for your neighbor to pick you up from the airport, or for your kid. And let's say you ground your kid or you're no longer friends with that neighbor, you can take the key back. Now there's one major downside, and here it is. It only works currently on Android devices. Yes, and of course the NFC card that's issued with the car. Now it's not to say that it won't happen on Apple. I spoke to one of the engineers at Hyundai that's working on this technology, and it turns out it's just delayed with Apple because Apple is the only manufacturer that doesn't allow developers, any third-party developer, not just Hyundai, to access the data from the NFC chip in the phone. Now there is movement afoot to change that. And what is it? September, we'll see a new iPhone, and we'll also see a new iOS. The general, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, the industry is saying that's when developers will have access to the NFC data, whatever comes off that chip, on Apple iOS devices, which means you could then use Android, iOS, as well as the card on pretty much any Hyundai car. And again, I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, I think you'll see this in more Hyundai cars moving forward. Now, to me, it would stand to reason, if you're going to put all these investments into changing the steering, the transmission, even a fancy rear suspension, you're probably going to upgrade the brakes. Not to the point where it's going to be a track vehicle, but at least you're going to make it work better. So with that, let's try it. Please don't try this at home. And let's get to 40, panic stop. Oh. I can't say it's stellar, but it's better than it was. So, carbon ceramic rotors on a track? Not exactly. But there definitely was some investment paid to those brakes in addition to everything else. Bit of a magic trick. You might think I went and changed the color. I didn't. This is a completely different car. It is a pre-production prototype secret car that I pilfered away from an engineer from Hatchie in Irvine, California. What this is a coming N-line version of the Sonata that you and I are driving today. Now, N-line, think of that as like M Sport or like AMG E53, so the middle of the road, not the full N like we've driven in that Veloster. Couple of things going on here. I have had a chance to drive it. I can't tell you anything about it. Hopefully I'll make a trip down to Fountain Valley to drive it a bit later, come with an episode. But long and short of the story, there are some suspension changes. Can't share those with you, but I can share with you some engine changes. So in the car we're driving, it's a 1.64 cylinder turbo. This is an engine that is the 2.5. It's actually the same family as the engine in the base version of the Sonata. So it's a 2.5 that has both gas direct injection and multi-point injection. It does not run an Atkinson cycle like that car does. This one has a turbocharger strapped to it, and there are significant changes. So it goes from 191 horsepower and 181 pounds of torque up to 290 horsepower and 310 pounds of torque. The horsepower peaks at about 5,800 RPM, and the torque comes in anywhere between 1,650 and 4,000 RPM. Now, you might remember back in our Veloster N episode on the track, we talked about a coming dual clutch transmission. Well, this is the incarnation of that transmission, or again, let's talk families. This is an 8-speed wet clutch, dual clutch transmission that is designed and built by Hyundai. My guess, this is like the brainchild of Albert Bierman. And just as an aside here, have you guys downloaded, rated and reviewed our new podcast, Inside the MotoMan Studio, where I talk to the key people shaping the car world, both from inside the car world as well as outside the car world? Well, coming up on January 8th is Albert Bierman, the man behind this. That's my cheap promotion of our second show. Make sure you go check that out. Peter Schreier's already been on the show. Anyway, I'll link his episode up here now. But back to this, that 8-speed wet clutch, dual clutch transmission is what's going to be on offer here. Basically no manual if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, but a derivation of this, and again, if I'm looking into the future, it'll be 8 speeds, but most likely not the same gearing as in this car. So this transmission is not just for a Sonata. Think of it as more N-line to come. And what we know is Sonatas and Velosters at this point. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled program. I would argue all the engineering that goes into cars like these, meaning something that's normal for ordinary civilians that want a car, not a crossover, not a sports sedan. All that engineering goes into ride quality rather than driving dynamics. And here, the immediate thing you notice is there's more stiffness to it, where it didn't exist previously in a Hyundai Sonata. And it's not just, oh, let's throw in some stiffer dampers and it'll change the way it drives. It's everything about it. It's the componentry, plus the dampers, plus the tuning. And it's immediate effect, whether you're at this speed. All of that kind of falls apart at high speeds, but that really is a discussion for a different place. Yes, I'm making a rather large fuss about this whole ride quality, but let's look at this from a different vantage point. The minute you get into this thing, you notice there's something different, and it's not just one thing. There are multiple aspects about it that have changed. But remember how we've talked about the spectrum that these cars are on. It's usually against Mazdas and Toyotas and Fords and Chevys. The thing about the ride quality, it now makes you think, at least in the ride quality, not so much driving dynamics. Remember, this is still a front-wheel drive vehicle. It's closer to that of like a European car than an Asian car like a Camry. I'll admit I'm being a rather pedantic car guy here because there's other aspects that overshadow the ride quality in terms of the amount of change going on here. Two in particular. Number one, it's got a Qi wireless charger. And you know how you use these things, they're great, but if you take your phone off of it after using it for a while, they're like a hot brick. Well, they engineered a fan into the wireless charger here. And then adding on to the whole wireless connectivity thing, you know, you can use like Alexa to turn your car on and off, or use the app. Well, it's not just that. The other party trick is you can switch on and off the heated seat or the cooled seat from the app or Alexa. So net-net, if we put all this together, the stuff that I'm pedantic about, the tech changes, even some of the design details like this that really stand out, it's that old saying, the reports of my death, or at least in the case of the sedan, have been greatly exaggerated.